The first thing I noticed wasn't the casket. It was the way the wind cut through the chapel door sharp and sudden, like someone had left it open on purpose. Dover Hill hadn't changed. Same stone walls, same coastal chill that settled in your bones, no matter how many layers you wore. But the silence that had changed. Or maybe I had. Maybe silence was all that was left when people no longer knew what to say to you. I hadn't been back in 11 years. The last time I stood in this chapel, I was in uniform leaving for Basra. This time I wore black. Not dress uniform, just plain civilian black. Because even grief apparently had a dress code that wasn't allowed to look too military. Ethan saw me the moment I stepped in. He didn't nod, didn't break from the crowd gathered near the altar. He just let his gaze pass over me like I was a face in a file recognized but inconvenient. I stood alone at the back coat still on, listening to the organ bleed notes that felt too gentle for what we'd all lost. Or pretended to. My father had died of a heart attack. Quick, quiet, like someone too tired to keep holding back. The pews were full. Old neighbors, colleagues, the mayor in her oversized scarf. But it wasn't grief that filled the air. It was performance. My father had once run the local veterans club. That meant people came out of habit, not love. Then Ethan took the podium. He stood tall, one hand gripping the edges like he'd practiced in the mirror. The words came smooth. Too smooth. Our father served with quiet honor. And he raised us, me and my sister Joanna, with that same sense of duty. My name rolled off his tongue like a prop carefully placed. Joanna, who carried our father's legacy into service overseas, who taught me the meaning of sacrifice long before I ever stepped into public office. There it was, the pivot. From morning sun to rising candidate, I stared straight ahead, unmoving. My boots planted into the chapel floor like I needed to remind the earth I still belonged to it. He didn't mention the silence after I deployed. Or the unopened letters. Or the last time I called home from a tent in Mosul and no one picked up. Instead, he painted our father as a guiding light, and me as the war-tested shadow that had inspired his public career. A convenient silhouette he could stretch or shrink depending on the crowd. There was a small framed photo near the casket. I hadn't seen it before. It was cropped tight, me and Dad shaking hands in front of a memorial wall. But my uniform had been edited subtly. My rank blurred, my patches replaced with a single British flag. It looked more palatable that way. The service ended without anyone saying my name again. As people filed out, some shook Ethan's hand. One woman even called him our next MP, God willing. He smiled humble and rehearsed. No one approached me, not even to say sorry for your loss. My mother stood stiff beside the casket, face unreadable hands folded in front of her like a statue carved from guilt. When I walked up, she didn't meet my eyes. Instead, she said, "You came." I nodded once. He was my father. She looked down at the floor like that was somehow debatable. Outside, the press waited, not for me, of course. Ethan answered 2 questions before guiding our mother to a car. I stayed behind, hands in pockets, watching as the cameras tracked them down the hill like a royal procession. No one noticed I was gone when I slipped behind the church toward the cliffside that overlooked the sea. It was the only place that didn't feel scripted. The waves hit the rocks with the same rhythm I remembered from childhood. I used to think the ocean spoke in code something only people like me could understand. I stood there a long while, letting the cold bite my face until my phone buzzed. A headline lit the screen. Candidate Ethan Callahan honors military sister at father's funeral. A military sister. Not a name, not a person, just a symbol he could hold up to catch the light. And in that moment, standing between the graves of people who never pretended to understand me and the brother who never stopped using me, I knew something was off. Something deeper than lies, something deliberate. And I wasn't going to leave Dover Hill until I found it. I wasn't looking for it. I was just trying to get coffee. The kind of cheap, bitter cup you drink when you haven't slept and don't want to feel anything. The cafe across from the post office still had the same chipped counters, same bell that rang too late after you'd already stepped inside. I was halfway to the register when I saw it half tucked into a stack of local bulletins by the door. A campaign flyer. I almost walked past it. Almost. But then I saw the photo. It was me. Standing in full kit helmet off sand, clinging to the edges of my gear rifle slung low across my chest. Basra 2010. I remember that day, because it was the first time we'd lost someone. And yet, here it was cropped and cleaned, brightened, to make me look like some poster girl for resolve. Across the top, in bold serif font, Callahan leadership tested in the fires of service, and then beneath it a line that made my stomach turn, inspired by Operation Larkspur, the mission that saved hundreds. I froze. Larkspur. They actually used the name, the same operation Ethan had no clearance to know about. The same one that never made it into public record because 6 civilians unarmed, unlisted, died in an unmarked alley when our drone misread movement for threat. We'd called in the strike. I had signed off. I'd seen the footage, seen the mother still holding her child, and now he was calling it salvation. I felt something hot crawl under my skin. Part rage, part sickness. I turned the flyer over, searching for an address, a disclaimer, anything, but all it said was, "Paid for by the committee to elect Ethan Callahan. Dover Hill deserves more." More of what? More ghosts, dressed as medals. I stormed out of the cafe, the flyer crushed in my hand. The cold didn't bite this time. I barely felt it. I walked fast. Faster, no destination, just the need to move, like the streets might spit out an answer if I paced hard enough. How did he get that photo? That mission was buried under a mountain of classification codes. Only 2 other people knew the full report, and neither of them had ever stepped foot in Dover Hill. He couldn't have just guessed, which meant one thing: someone gave it to him, or worse, someone wanted him to use it. He wasn't just capitalizing on my service, he was rewriting it, and suddenly the speech at the funeral, the edited uniform in the chapel photo, the way our mother had stayed quiet, all of it snapped into alignment like a weapon being assembled. He didn't just need my name, he needed my silence, and for the first time in years I didn't know what scared me more, what Ethan was hiding, or what he might have already erased. Whatever it was, it had started with Larkspur, and it wasn't finished. I hadn't planned to stay the night, but the motel room key was still warm in my hand when I reached the door. Room 8. The same one my father always used for visiting colleagues. No one at the funeral had offered a couch, let alone a spare room. Maybe they assumed I preferred distance. Maybe they preferred not to ask. The room smelled like bleach and something old fabric softener that had long given up. I dropped my bag on the bed, unzipped it just enough to let my boots breathe, and sat. The silence buzzed. Not peaceful, but charged like the moment before a radio catches signal. I stared at the nightstand for a long time before opening the drawer. It was empty except for one thing. A key, old, brass, tied to a frayed blue ribbon. No tag, no note, but I knew exactly what it was for. My father kept a gun safe in the back room of the bookstore, hidden behind a shelf of misfiled war memoirs no one ever touched. Not because they were boring, but because he wanted them to look boring. That's how he operated. Low heat, quietly boiling. I waited until after dark. The bookstore hadn't changed. Same dust dancing in beams of light. Same hand-painted sign on the window chipped at the edges. I used the back door. No cameras. He hated the idea of being watched unless he was the one holding the lens. The shelf hadn't moved, but I had to pull 3 books, Paths of Glory, The Things They Carried, and Silence of the Guns before the panel released. The safe opened with the key like it had been waiting. Inside was a velvet-lined wooden box. Heavy, blackened at the edges. I opened it. The revolver was pristine. 6-shot Webley, old but cared for like a museum piece. It wasn't his service weapon. This one was ceremonial. A gift, maybe. But something else was taped beneath the lid. A flash drive. No label. Just red electrical tape across the top like a wound someone had tried to dress too quickly. Back at the motel, I stared at the drive before plugging it in like maybe if I hesitated long enough it wouldn't open at all. But it did. 3 audio files, no titles, no dates. I clicked on the first. Crimson Shade, Phase 3. Adjustments to transport manifest confirmed. Civilian listings scrubbed. Cargo classified under humanitarian aid protocols. A second voice. Female, sharp-clipped. Cross-reference the new encryption tags. If it leaks, we deny defer redirect. The minister's office won't touch it unless it's already burned. There was silence then. What about the oversight report? A man's voice this time, smooth, familiar. Ethan, shelve it. This ends here. No paper trail. I ripped the headphones off. Crimson Shade. That wasn't just any operation. That was the one that was pulled from execution 3 years ago after a leak about arms shipments routed through civilian refugee camps. It was supposed to be investigated by Parliament. It vanished overnight. And now here it was on tape. My brother. My blood. Signing off on a black operation and laundering it through humanitarian aid. I played the second file, fingers shaking. This time it was more fragmented. Arguments. Logistics. Code names. I caught glimpses. Strathwell Logistics, G-Class Ordnance, Glasgow South Holding Corp. Every phrase like a drop of acid on everything I thought I knew about what he'd become. The third file was just 2 sentences. Ethan again. If this surfaces, we bury it. Her name gives us credibility. Use it as long as it lasts. Her name, mine. I sat there, fists clenched, pulse in my ears louder than anything else. My father had known. He must have. Why else hide it this way? And yet he never said a word. Maybe that was his way of protecting me. Or maybe it was guilt. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows from passing headlights crawl across the walls like something alive. By morning, I knew who I had to find. Callum Rourke had served with me in Basra and Mosul. He wasn't flashy, wasn't political. Just the kind of man who remembered details and had no patience for lies. He'd retired 5 years ago and moved to Brighton, ran a bar with bad jazz and worse coffee. I found him behind the counter at noon, drying a glass with a towel that looked as tired as his eyes. He didn't say hello, just looked at me like someone checking a perimeter. You're not here for a drink. I shook my head. I need to ask about Crimson Shade. The glass hit the counter too hard. He stared at me. The color drained from his face. Then he turned, walked to the far end of the bar, and locked the front door without saying a word. That name's supposed to be buried. I have proof it wasn't. I slid him my phone, played 10 seconds of the audio. His hands trembled as he listened. He turned it off. Where'd you get this? My father's safe. He nodded once, then sat. Crimson Shade wasn't just one op, he said. It was a pattern. Arms, data, political leverage. We were running cover for something way bigger than us. I thought it was canceled. It was. After someone tried to go public. A lieutenant whistle blew to an internal review panel. Next thing we know, she's discharged on mental instability. The inquiry never sees daylight. Ethan's in the audio, I said. And Strathwell Logistics, Glasgow South. Rourke leaned in. Strathwell's just a shell. Everything roots through them. They cover for everyone, contractors, MPs, even MOD suppliers. You try to cut through it, you'll be chasing ghosts. Then give me something real. He paused, looked at me. You remember Kieran Malik? I did. Tech intel. Brash. Too smart for his own good. Last I heard, he was freelancing cyber surveillance for some NGO in Brussels. He kept a secondary archive, Rourke said. Said if the ministry ever tried to erase him, he'd erase them first. But you didn't hear it from me. Why didn't you ever come forward? I asked. Rourke's jaw tightened. Because unlike you, I didn't have a family member trying to drag me into the headlines. I kept my head down. You should too. But I couldn't. I thanked him. Walked out into the wind phone, heavy in my hand. The files were still there. Still real. Still humming inside the storage chip like a live wire waiting to be touched. My brother wasn't just lying. He was complicit, and I had no idea how far that rot had spread, But I knew one thing for certain: if this was the path he'd chosen, I was done walking quietly beside it. I spent the night in the motel editing the truth, not rewriting it, just stripping it down until there was nothing left but the raw, undiluted burn of what was. The files from the flash drive, the names, the voices, every second of audio felt like slicing open something that had already scarred over. But I couldn't stop. Not now. There was no time for full production. Just one clean cut, Ethan's voice authorizing the erasure of oversight, the rerouting of classified weapons, and most damning his calm declaration: use her name, as long as it lasts. I isolated that line, played it 5 times. The 5th time I didn't flinch. He didn't think I'd ever fight back. That was his first mistake. The next morning I sent a text I hadn't sent in 9 years. You still chasing things people want buried? It took less than a minute for the reply to come through. Who's asking? The girl who once carried your busted laptop through a mortar blast. Joanna. I need 15 minutes of airtime. Prime slot. Unfiltered. You in? Her name was Sarah Malik, independent journalist, now senior producer at NBN News. We'd crossed paths in Kabul when truth was still something people bled for. She called. Do you understand what you're walking into? You're accusing a sitting MP, a defense contractor, and half the MOD. I'm not accusing, I said. I'm broadcasting. Silence. Then, be at the studio tomorrow. 7 p.m. Bring the original files. I ended the call and stared at the motel ceiling, fingers numb from typing. I hadn't eaten in almost a day, but my body had learned long ago how to burn purpose instead of food. That afternoon I went to see my mother, not for permission, not for comfort. I just needed to know which side of history she planned to stand on. She was in the garden pruning roses that had already died. She didn't look up when I walked in, didn't ask how I was. I sat on the bench across from her, the same one she used to sit on when she'd wait for my father to come home from his shift at the bookstore. Back when waiting still meant something. I know what Ethan's done, I said quietly. Then why come here? Because he used my name to do it. And you let him. She didn't blink, just kept pruning. You think this family needs another scandal? She said. No, I said. It needs a spine. She paused, looked at me, then really looked. Not with judgment, not even with shame. Just fatigue. I can't take sides, Joanna. You're both my children. No, I said. You have 2 children, but only one of us is telling the truth. I stood to leave. She didn't stop me. Outside, the sky was beginning to gray. I walked slowly, letting the wind from the coast slap my face back to focus. I knew this feeling. Not fear, not exactly. More like the quiet before an operation when every sense sharpens and the world goes too still. At the studio, Sarah met me at the back entrance. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She handed me a flash drive. This copies everything. Air gap secure. I had my tech sweep it. You trust me? No, she said. I trust your record. We entered the editing bay. Her team was already prepping the visual assets, audio waveforms, supporting footage from refugee camps near Basra, financial charts from Strathwell. All curated to let the sound carry the story, not the face. I watched the timeline scroll, my brother's voice repeating like a noose tightening. Use her name. Use her name. By 6:47 p.m., the network lawyers were already having panic attacks in the hallway. Too late. The countdown had started. Sarah looked at me one last time. You sure I've never been more sure of anything in my life? As I stepped into the on-air room, the red light blinked on above the door. This time I didn't need a rifle. I had the truth, and it was loaded. The lights were too bright. That's the first thing I remember. Not the cameras, not the audience, not even the countdown ticking down in my earpiece like a bomb about to go off. Just the light, flat, clinical, merciless. The studio wasn't grand. Black walls, panel table, 2 chairs angled just enough to seem like a conversation, not a confrontation, But every inch of that space was loaded. I sat first. My palms were dry, heart-steady breath low in my chest. I'd fought in rooms smaller than this with higher stakes and worse odds. Ethan walked in 2 minutes before we went live. Dark blue suit, white pocket square tie like it had been ironed between press interviews. He offered a nod, just enough for the cameras to read civility. But his eyes didn't land on mine. He didn't need to look. He thought he already knew how this would end. Just remember, he muttered low enough that only I could hear, the more you swing, the more you look unstable. I smiled. Then I guess you'd better duck. The floor director counted us down from 10. At 0, the theme music rolled. The camera panned, and suddenly we were live. Primetime debate between MP Ethan Callahan and his decorated veteran sister. I could feel millions watching, leaning forward, waiting for the cracks. The host introduced us with a voice so smooth it barely registered as human. Tonight we're joined by MP Ethan Callahan and his sister, former intelligence officer Joanna Callahan, to address rising concerns about transparency and ethics in military contracting. She paused. A slight pivot. Then, in the role of personal legacy and public leadership, Ethan leaned forward. First of all, let me say how grateful I am that Joanna's here tonight. Her service, however misunderstood, is part of what shaped who I am today. I didn't blink. He continued, smiling like a surgeon. I think it's unfortunate she's been misled by bad faith sources. These recordings she's referencing, they're manipulated, fabricated by individuals with a history of mental stress. I've seen the reports. The host turned to me. Joanna, your response? I leaned into the mic slowly, calm. The recordings aren't fake. They're raw, time-stamped, and backed by metadata. One of the voices is yours. He laughed soft and condescending. Anyone can fake a voice now. AI splicing deepfakes. It's common knowledge. You know that, Joanna. I stared straight ahead. Yes, I do. That's why I brought the original encrypted files verified by a third-party forensic lab. They're archived with NBN Legal as of this morning. A pause. His smile thinned. The host raised an eyebrow. So you're saying Ethan Callahan authorized falsified humanitarian shipments that concealed weapons-grade materials? I nodded. And scrubbed civilian manifests and erased oversight. Ethan straightened his back. The performance hardened. Let's be honest about what's happening here. My sister has struggled since leaving the service. PTSD, paranoia. Those things are real, and they don't make her a liar, just vulnerable. It landed like a punch, not to me, but to them. The viewers, the crowd, the public, framing me as the broken soldier, the unhinged veteran clinging to ghosts. I didn't react. Instead, I looked at the camera and said one thing. I've seen what guilt looks like in combat. It flinches. You don't. And for a moment, just a flicker, his eyes shifted. Not fear, not shame, but recognition. The way a man looks when he knows his weapon has just misfired. Then a voice broke from the back of the studio, soft, unsteady. She's telling the truth. Everyone turned. It was my mother. She stood at the edge of the audience, hands clenched together so tight her knuckles had gone white. She showed me the files, the voices. I know my son, and I know what it sounds like when he lies. Silence crushed the room. Ethan's jaw flexed. Mom, don't. But she cut him off. No. You used her pain. You used his death, Dad's death, to build yourself into something he never would have recognized. The cameras didn't cut. They didn't dare. I sat frozen, heart-pounding, watching the last thread of our family unravel on live television. The host tried to regain control, but the audience had shifted. Something had cracked open, and no amount of polish could seal it. Ethan turned toward me, voice lower now, no mic needed. You think this is justice? I leaned in. No, this is just the broadcast. The justice comes next. And for the first time in his career, my brother had no line to read. Ethan didn't get arrested. There were no handcuffs. No front-page mugshot, no breaking news crawl of him being hauled out of his townhouse in Westminster. That's not how people like him fall. They unravel. By morning, the donor pages on his campaign site had gone dark. Corporate logos disappeared like spilled ink, drying fast. The Callahan Fund for Public Renewal gone. The press secretary resigned at 8:13 a.m. sharp. By noon, 3 MPs had issued statements of deep concern, and by nightfall, his party had quietly removed his name from the fall conference lineup. Not one of them mentioned my name, but they didn't need to. The files had done their work. The voice clips, the buried emails, the rerouted contracts tied to Glasgow South holdings now under parliamentary investigation. Strathwell's headquarters locked down, procurement halted, one minister placed on leave. That part came quickly. And Ethan. He stood in front of a small press pool on the courthouse steps 3 days later. Blue suit again, same knot in his tie. He didn't deny anything. He didn't confess either. He just said the words men like him were trained to say. There have been misunderstandings. I'm cooperating fully. I remain committed to serving the public. His eyes never met the cameras. He didn't need to look ashamed. The silence spoke for him. As for me, I packed that night. No headlines. No speeches. Just the motel room and the zipped duffel half full. I folded my old uniform jacket one last time, not to keep it, just to remember it had once fit. Outside Dover Hill was still asleep. Quiet streets. Yellow street lamps flickering like they didn't know whether to keep burning or give up. I didn't say goodbye to my mother. I'd already said what needed saying. I passed the bookstore on the way out. The light inside was off, but I could still see the outline of the shelf where he'd hidden the revolver. A part of me wanted to go in, just stand there for a second, smell the dust, maybe touch the spine of a book he once loved. But I didn't. That place had already said its piece. At the train station, no one recognized me. No one cared that I'd just set fire to a political legacy with a USB stick and a memory, and I liked it that way. Because this wasn't about being right. This wasn't about revenge or even justice in the way most people mean it. Ethan still had his name, his suits, his house. He'd vanish behind a consultancy gig or a think tank until the storm passed. That's how the system works. But now every room he walks into will go quiet for half a second too long. Every donor handshake will linger just a beat too stiff. Every legacy dinner, every magazine profile tainted. He won't wear shackles, but he'll wear suspicion. That's a kind of justice. And me, I left Dover Hill the way I entered, alone, but not empty. The truth didn't save me. It didn't fix the past, but it did something else. It burned through the lie. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. The refugee camp sat on the edge of the Aegean, half tents, half shipping containers, the kind of place people passed through but rarely escaped. I arrived just before dusk. The air smelled like salt and diesel and something older displacement maybe. A volunteer led me to a makeshift office in a converted container. Inside, a man with a weary face and clear eyes waited behind a folding table. No handshake, just a nod of recognition. You brought it. I placed the flash drive on the table. Every file, every voice, every map they buried. He didn't ask why I hadn't gone to Parliament, or the military courts. He already knew the answer. You don't plant a seed in poison soil and expect it to grow. Behind him, a corkboard hung with photographs, drone shots, satellite overlays, lists of locations where supplies were supposed to arrive but never did. I turned to leave, but he stopped me. You could have burned it all. No one would have blamed you. I looked at him. I didn't come to erase history. I came to correct it. He nodded again, and that was it. Outside, the sun was folding itself into the sea. I walked past rows of tents, past children drawing on asphalt with sticks, past women who'd seen too many borders and not enough mercy. No one knew who I was. No one cared. And that, too, was peace. Back in my room, a rented flat above a bakery that opened at 5 a.m., I opened my laptop. The cursor blinked on a blank document. Title: The Campaigns They Never Wrote Down. I didn't start with dates or names. I started with a question. What happens when silence becomes survival? And slowly, word by word, I began to answer it. I didn't write for glory or vengeance. I wrote because somewhere someone would be handed a medal for a war they never fought, and someone else would be forgotten because their story was inconvenient. That's how truth disappears, unless someone writes it back. Unless someone says this happened. I was there. And no, I won't shut up about it. The truth doesn't scream. It waits. But not anymore. Not with me.